Welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, where today's brightest minds in the medical device industry go to get their most useful and actionable insider knowledge, direct from some of the world's leading medical device experts and companies.
All right, I think my next guest knows this, but regardless, I'll say it anyway. Allison Komiyama, every time I talk to her, I just have a great time. I mean, it's hard to imagine that somebody makes regulatory science fun. She seems to be successful at doing so. Allison is the owner at Acknowledge Regulatory Strategies. Check out their website, acknowledge-rs.com. But on this episode of the Global Medical Device Podcast, she shares some thoughts. If you didn't know her background, there was a period of time in her career where she was a reviewer at FDA. And now that she's sort of on the other side of the equation, so to speak, she recently said something in a conversation that we were having. And man, I wish I knew that back when I was an FDA reviewer. I'm like, all right, pause. Let's record our conversation and talk about those sorts of things. So she shares some of these tips and pointers. So I hope you enjoy this episode of the Global Medical Device Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Global Medical Device Podcast, streaming to you live, or actually not live, it's recorded, streaming to you via audio and video. So if you're listening to us as you normally do, that's great. If you want to watch these episodes, they're on video now. So go to YouTube, check it out at the Greenlight Guru channel. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up and the likes and the bells and all those sorts of things that you do on YouTube, so that way you keep notified of that. But either way, if you just rather listen to us as you're walking your dog and taking out your trash, that still works too. So thank you. But joining me on this episode of the Global Medical Device Podcast is Allison Komiyama. Allison is the owner of Acknowledge Regulatory Strategies. So Allison, welcome back.
Thank you, John. It's so nice to be back with you, and also we get to see each other this time. So it's fun.
I know it's been a bit. I mean, we were just catching up before the show about last time that we connected. And it's hard to believe it's been over a year and a half ago. That just doesn't seem right. But I know we're all probably excited to get back and doing face-to-face things. I mean, we'll get into the show here in a moment, but you have an in-person event coming up later this year too, if I recall, right?
That is right. I'm hoping you'll come. It's going to be the Regulatory Alliance Forum in August. So
all right,
it's in person, and we're doing a smaller size so we can stay socially distanced and follow all the guidelines. But
cool.
All the speakers were like, "Yeah, we want to be in person. Let's all be vaccinated and be there." So I'm
cool.
very excited.
All right, well, and we'll send a link to all the details about that event in the notes that accompany the show. But you and I were on a call the other day. Greenlight Guru, we recently formed a regulatory advisory board. You were so gracious to be willing to be part of that, so thank you for that first and foremost. And this group of people, which, I'm in awe in this group. Like if you look at the backgrounds and the experience of these people, I'm like, man, I'm like, it sounds weird maybe, but a kid in a candy store as far as regulatory is concerned. It's like I feel like I'm at the all-star game of regulatory people. Maybe that's a better way to. And I get the autographs for all these people and hear their insights and their wisdom. It's just a great group. But you said something the other day. I'm like, oh, that's a good topic. And the thing you said is, man. And I'm paraphrasing, maybe it's a direct quote, but something along the lines of, man, I wish I knew all of these things back in the day when I was an FDA reviewer. I'm like, let's talk about that. So you used to be an FDA reviewer.
For a very short period of time.
But it still counts.
It was not a very, people there 15, 20 years. I'm like, I can barely hold a candle to that. But yeah, it counts. Thank you. It counts.
It counts. I mean, you were an infant for a very short period of time, but you still were an infant.
It's true. Well said. Yeah.
All right. So when you were there, I mean, you got to, if I recall too, you were like a biocompatibility expert, right?
Yeah. I was a bio nerd that worked on a lot of different, as a consult on different files, which I loved.
And just an order of magnitude, not that it really matters, but like, how many submissions were you part of reviewing in your period of time at FDA?
I mean,
hundreds?
Not as lead reviewer. No,
Not as
I
lead
would
reviewer,
say
but hundreds probably.
probably 50 to 100,
Okay.
somewhere
So you
there.
saw a
Yeah.
lot of things, a lot of things.
A lot of things. I mean, I would say on any given day, most reviewers will have 10 files that they're working on actively, but you also have consults. It's a lot of
Yeah,
other
sure.
smaller projects that you work on. And I was also doing research, so I was farmed out to the folks over in OCell, which I loved. It was like a
Yeah.
mini postdoc that I got to do while I was there.
Yeah. So now, fast forward a few years later, at acknowledge regulatory strategies. I mean, you're doing a lot of regulatory strategies, submission preparation. I
It's in
guess.
the name. Yeah,
Well, I mean, duh, but sometimes it's not obvious. But
that's
I
true.
mean, what types of services are you providing to companies these days?
Sure. So we really stay on the pre-market side of things. So we do a lot of regulatory strategy. So we work with mostly smaller startups, anywhere from like 1 to 10 people on their staff, and try and help them figure out, okay, what does your future regulatory pathway look like? It's not always clear, right? There can be 5 different pathways, and do you do a pre-sub first? Should you go for breakthrough designation first? Should you forgo all that and just go straight for your pre-market submission? So we do a lot of 510Ks, a lot of pre-subs. Recently breakthrough designation requests, working on a couple safer technology program applications
Well,
as well at the moment.
nice. All
Yeah.
right. So the comment you made, man, I wish I knew these things when I was a FDA reviewer. I don't know if you have a top 3, 5, 10, 38, but what is one of those things that you wish you knew?
Sure. I'll start with saying I actually went and asked a few folks that are either still at FDA or since left FDA as well, what their take was on this. Because I said, I've been thinking a lot about new reviewers that are at FDA, and we've had quite a few as our lead reviewers on files recently, where they've never actually been in the building. They are really new employees. They're working from home. They've never met their team in person. Their managers sometimes, they haven't met in person. So we're kind of dealing with a lot of new reviewers who are trying to navigate being a new reviewer and what's actually important. And we can see that reflected in some of the questions that we're getting. I think the managers at FDA are doing an amazing job trying to make sure that their teams get the training and the mentorship that they need while they're there. But it's hard, and it's hard when you're there in person. I remember sitting down and looking at files, going like, what am I doing here? What is 4-part harmony? So that's actually one of the first things I was thinking about is deficiencies and how deficiencies are written. You're usually trained, or you're supposed to be trained that to provide what's called 4-part harmony in each deficiency that you write, and you're supposed to list what was provided in the file, what's missing, what needs to be provided to answer this question or answer this deficiency, and why they need it. What is the regulatory or scientific question that it's going to address? So it's becoming very savvy at understanding how to craft those deficiencies and that AI letter that gets sent to sponsors. And the other piece is also, how do you manage your team, your consults on the file? It's not just the lead reviewer that's looking at your submission, it's a team of people. And so oftentimes what I found one of the most challenging things is to take the deficiencies that are coming back from these various consults, that is my team that's helping me review this file, and to look at their deficiencies and make sure that I'm managing the entire deficiency letter. I think what can happen is the lead reviewer will collect all the deficiencies and then just compile and send it out, when really in best practice it's going through making sure all of your consults are asking relevant questions. Is this really an important question? Is it truly something that is deficient about the file? And then having that conversation with that consult. And I think, it's hard to back down after you've sent that AI letter out, once you've asked those questions, to say, oh, actually, never mind, that's not important, right? You kind of have to keep moving forward. So, I think that's one of the big ones that I felt, wow, I really wish I had just had been, trained more on what that needs to look like. So.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure you've got a few other things that are top of mind for you or through your connections and network. But part of what I'm curious about too. I mean, you just mentioned that a lot of these reviewers, they they they've never been in the FDA office. They've worked their entire time at FDA has been remote, and sometimes they haven't even met the teams and their colleagues from FDA. I think there's that. That's probably a huge factor in this. And then I was just catching up with another peer the other day, and she was sharing with me. We were talking about breakthrough and step, as you mentioned, but she was talking about some branch or some divisions are no longer receiving pre-subs for the rest of the year. I think one of them was like the IVD side of thing. I'm like, that's what? It's like middle of the year, still a lot of 2021 left. And then we talked a little bit further. It's like, oh, well, they've been so inundated with EUAs on the IVD side of things that they're borrowing resources from other groups within the agencies too. So I got to imagine that all of these sorts of things are creating some of the challenges that our industry is seeing right now.
Absolutely. I think, they called it surge review, or, there were different groups that were borrowing reviewers from other branches that weren't as impacted by COVID. And it was tough. I mean, I do not envy what they have had to deal with in the past year and a half. I think it's, as there are a lot of people that have left, right? A lot of people said, this is the right time for me to retire now. And so they're, seeing a lot of the veteran reviewers and people that have been there a long time leaving, and then also trying to hire. And, sometimes that knowledge doesn't, get passed on as seamlessly as we all would want. I think, from industry's perspective, I often feel like one of the most beneficial things that we can do to improve the speed of review and improve, the time that our files take to go through that process, is really to support the reviewers. I think
Yeah.
we often will see upper management making decisions or putting guidance out there and saying, hey, this is a great idea. This is a program that, we're hearing industry wants, and we're going to roll it out. And then the reviewers are there trying to scramble and understand, okay, what does that actually do? How does that actually impact my day-to-day review and the resources that I have available to me? I think that's a disconnect, and I wish that industry could say, okay, how do we support the reviewers so that we can help them manage those two voices that are coming, at the
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned guidance documents, and I've heard this before, and I don't know. I've not sat in the seat, but that um, um, in a particular submission, somebody was sharing that they had cited or followed a particular guidance document for their product or whatever the case may have been, but that they got a lot of questions from the reviewer that were counter to what was in the guidance document. And it's like, now you got to dance this dance. It's like, me as the submitter of this information, I've got this guidance and it's from FDA, and here this reviewer is saying things that are the opposite of that guidance document, and it's like a head scratcher. Like, how do guidance documents, do reviewers get this information? Do they not get this information? How can I help if I'm submitting? Say, hey, here are these guidances from FDA that we follow. I mean, is that a realistic scenario that happens often, or do you know?
Yeah, and it's funny you bring it up. Last year at the Regulatory Alliance Forum, one of the former directors of one of the groups, who will remain unnamed, she said, I have to be honest, I didn't read most of the guidance documents. They're very long. They're really, there's one every day that seems to come out right now. I don't have the time to go through them. So, you have all these files sitting on your desk that you need to review. When do you have time to go read the breakthrough guidance document? When do you have time to go read
Yeah, I mean,
the
you're already late.
Exactly, right? So, yeah, I think that could be something that FDA could work on. How do you make sure that the reviewers are really up to speed on all the guidance documents that you're pumping out there all the time? I think from my perspective now, one of the ways we do it is try to incorporate the guidance documents into our files to make sure we say, hey, this is what you've said, this is our from certain press releases, we're getting this language from you.
That's a good tip.
Not to make them feel bad or to say, rub it in their face. It's
Just to
more,
help them out.
yeah, like here, let's talk about what your agency has said and what we're trying to follow. We're trying to follow your lead. And one of the comments that came back from one of my buddies, she said, one of the things she didn't realize when she was a new reviewer was how diligent a lot of us in industry are at keeping up on guidance and the changes in regulations, because that's my job, right?
Yeah,
So
that's
my
what we do.
company, that's what we do.
Right.
And in my company, every Thursday we have a journal club. And in journal club, it's kind of like when it goes back to my days in academia. We'd have journal club. We talk about cool new journal articles, and that's what we do.
Yeah.
We take a guidance document that's new. One of us will go through it and try to distill it and provide an output. Saying here's what I take away from it and what we should all keep up on tabs. And actually, David Pudwill, he has Mr. Regulatory. I know you've interviewed or you've had him on this as well. Fantastic service. I mean, he has the Mr. Regulatory guidance digest. I mean, and he really makes it easy to understand and walks you through. So, what new guidances are out. So, can't speak highly enough about what he's providing. And I hope and I believe that FDA reviewers are also consuming, some of this content, and I know that they listen to your podcast. So.
Well, I mean, I don't. Maybe this is the craziest thing I've said. Probably not, but maybe it's the craziest thing I've said today. Have you ever thought about when you do your review, your journal club, your guidance review club? Have you ever thought about just like setting up a camera and recording it and then publishing it? Because I mean, that might be good stuff, right? I mean, especially for regulatory nerds.
Yeah, I have thought about it actually. I think the hardest thing is we talk oftentimes very candidly about how does this impact current clients.
Yeah,
So we
all
probably
right.
have to have we have to have like an open session and then a closed door session, or have everybody under a big NDA. But so that's you're making me think, John. This is helpful.
Yeah. Anyway, so then you just get it to all the reviewers at FDA, and they're like, oh, well, let's listen to Allison and her team review standards and guidances.
Part of the training that they could.
Seriously, I mean, I mean, it seems to me like in the past, certainly 2 years, but recently for sure, that the volume of guidance that is coming out is crazy to me.
Yes.
And I don't know why. And it's like, well, if there's so much emphasis and time, somebody's writing those things, if there's so many resources are being spent preparing these things, somebody thinks they're important for some reason. It seems like that would be worth, at least knowing more about or doing a better job. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's probably a whole different topic for a whole different day. But
that's a great point. I mean, it's supposed to be FDA's current thinking, right? When a guidance document comes out, but
which is confusing when it's not.
Right. Yeah, because there are different groups at FDA, and they say, well, we see that guidance and we read the guidance, or maybe they didn't read the guidance, but but that's not how our current thinking in our branch, which I know is not supposed to be how it works, but it's true. I mean, and there are different risks to different devices, right? I mean,
sure.
There's some very low risk class 2 devices, in my opinion, and then there's some very high risk class 2 devices. And to try and say that they're equivalent in risk and how you need to review it, and what are the biocompatibility impacts of those things, it's just not possible. So I know that it's not a one size fits all for all the different branches at FDA. I had a really great conversation. There's a person who just left FDA, I think a week or 2 ago, and we just had a conversation. And one of his comments, I asked him the same question, like, what recommendation would you give to new reviewers? And he said, one of the biggest things that he really focused on was, there's what the regulations say, right? There is the legal definition, and here's what the 21 CFR says. but really, how do you interpret the regulations? What is the spirit of the regulation? What does it mean, and how does it apply? Right? I think there are a lot of new reviewers, or just reviewers in general, that will just go to the letter of the law. Right? Another consultant I talked to, he said, when I was reviewing things my first year, I just would try and make, for substantial equivalence, you're just trying to make sure everything's identical to what to the predicate, because that's what I was told. It has to be equivalent to the predicate. But there's, the whole point of the 510K program, or one of the points of the 510K program, is that there are going to be differences.
There's gray
technology. There's different, there's got to be some design improvements over time, and it can be, slow improvements over time. But the question is that an appropriate predicate? And is, the clinical use of this new method, does it raise different questions of safety and effectiveness? Those are the questions. And, trying to interpret the flow chart, right, of the 510K flow chart, and trying to understand, again, what does the regulation mean? How does it apply to the device? And, how do you ask relevant questions? How do you, really understand the fundamentals of the device? And what does that mean with regard to risk? And is it clearable, right? I mean, I think for most devices, and I think when they do the MDUFA, or they're talking about their goals at FDA, what are the shared goals? How do we, how are they asking the right questions? And I think a big part of that is, understanding the regulations, and really understanding the spirit of the regulation, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I want to take a quick break. I want to remind folks I'm talking with Allison Komiyama. Allison is with Acknowledge Regulatory Strategies. You heard her share a little bit about what her and her team do and how they help companies. You can learn more about their products and services by visiting their website, acknowledge-rs.com. And I'm sure they'd be thrilled to have a conversation with you and leverage some of their expertise. And speaking of companies that are here to help, this is what we do at Greenlight Guru. We're here to help as well. So we have the only medical device quality management success platform on the market today, designed by actual medical device professionals for medical device companies. Novel concept, I know, but we've got workflows to help you manage your design and development, document and records management, as well as post-market quality events, post-market surveillance, things of that nature. And that's a big deal. You need to be able to manage that total product lifecycle of your medical devices. So check it out, learn more, go to www.greenlight.guru, and we'd be thrilled to have a conversation with you and see if we might be able to help meet your needs and your requirements. So Allison, you said something, a moment ago about sort of that review process, and one of the things that's sort of always been intriguing to me is that it feels like, or has felt like in my past, and maybe this is hopefully changed, or maybe this is you haven't had this experience, but it's always felt like that me as submitter of 510K, whatever, pre-sub, whatever the case may be, that I was just struggling to communicate with the reviewer. I felt like we were just reading from a different book, or speaking a completely different language. And I remember one thing in particular, it drove me crazy. But I'll open that wound up a moment and share. But I was working on a 510K. This is a little bit of the way back machine, and the product had a material that we weren't making this material, we were purchasing it, and there's like 3 suppliers in the world for this particular material, and there is a complete master file on file at FDA. It wasn't a drug, it was a polymeric material that had full battery of everything for this specific indication for use. And now, I didn't see the contents. The company is proprietary, but the company did send me a letter and say, hey, yes, FDA can access this file, or we give you our permission for the FDA to access this on your behalf. Can't share with you. but then I was asked to do the full battery test anyway, and I was like, that just didn't make any sense to me at all. And I wonder if it was one of those moments where there was like this literal interpretation of something that was written and not necessarily thinking about, okay, well, we already have this body of knowledge from the supplier on this material for everything that would be needed for that body contact and duration. I don't know. That was didn't really do a good job of asking a question there, but hopefully you're tracking with me. And I
Yeah, I'm
gotta
with
grab
you,
my
man.
power, so I'm listening. I'm just grabbing my plug here. I'm gonna die in the
Okay.
middle of this thing. So
I'll be sitting talking to myself if you lose
yeah,
your
well,
juice.
should have planned ahead. I just didn't do a very good job of that. But does anything I just said make any sense at all as far as like,
100%. Yeah. Gosh,
yeah,
I feel like you just kind of reiterated something that happened a couple of weeks ago with something I was
yeah.
working on. Like, wow. So history repeats itself. I think
Well, and I think
the
biocompatibility is one of those topics in particular. It's just like people need to have. I mean, I believe the regulation is clear and says, I'm paraphrasing extremely here, but oh, if there's evidence that you can provide to support that it's already been addressed, then you don't need to redo it. But it doesn't seem to be the case. But anyway, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I think yeah, biocomp's a really good example because I think there's a clear standard, right? ISO 10993 and or -1, and that's the overarching standard for all the subparts of that standard. And FDA has a guidance on how to use 10993, and they came out with an additional website recently that says here's how to look at your device and how to decide what sort of testing you need. And as a person who was a biocomp consult on many of these files, um, and I could say that I sort of went through as a checklist. I used it more as a checklist for the early files that I worked on, and it pains me to say that because I feel like I know seeing it from this side, gosh, it shouldn't be, right? It really is supposed to be a risk-based approach. You're supposed to use the wealth of information that you have maybe on a material to decide whether or not additional testing is needed. I feel like FDA comes out with, they want to reduce the amount of animals that they're using in testing. There's a global effort to try and reduce animal
Right.
testing. For sensitization testing, for example, I've talked recently to a lot of different test labs, 3 or 4 of them, and I said, how many times have you seen a sensitization test come back positive or with a bad result? And they said this many. Every single one said, that test, everyone's got to do it. If you have something that's touching.
I had a failure, and I'll explain it here in a moment. But go ahead.
Yeah, but they've all said no. It really how sensitive is that sensitization test, and also how relevant is it for to demonstrate that this if there's really going to be biocompatibility concern. This is a bigger conversation than for
Oh
this,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
so yeah, I mean, how do you leverage master file information? How do you use real world evidence or clinical testing that you've gathered, and also looking at what are the reports on if it's a consumer product, right? If there is actually a material that's used regularly in a consumer product, is that causing sensitization, irritation? So there's a lot of information out there, and I would say to my earlier self, if I had been working at FDA, like, don't use it as a checklist. Like, really try to understand what are the important questions. Is there something that could be toxic on the material that's a residual left behind? If that likelihood is low, or if that risk is low, do you need to go off and kill a bunch of guinea pigs? Those are
Yeah,
the questions
right.
that I feel like younger Allison hopefully would have been receptive to.
Well, I mean, here's what I've learned through my life, and it's taken me a while to figure this out, is that for most questions, there are multiple answers that are acceptable.
Yes.
And I think though that it's human nature to think, and I think industry is guilty of this too. I think industry is super guilty of, well, what does FDA want? What do they want for this? Well, what do I need to include? Blah blah blah. So they're asking to be spoon fed, except for sometimes when they're being spoon fed, they don't like how it tastes. And I was like, well, think for yourself, step back. But I think that's a big lesson. Sometimes there is more than one right answer. But the sensitization test that I had back in the day that failed, we had a antibiotic impregnated catheter that was impregnated with, I was trying to think, don't share anything proprietary, but this is all public domain, that was impregnated with two antibiotics, rifampin and minocycline. Um, One of them, I can't remember, had a orange, rusty color in nature, and the catheter itself, once it was impregnated, had that color. So it was a hideous looking catheter, but it was impregnated with antibiotics to prevent catheter related bloodstream infections.
Right.
My memory could be off. I've had a lot of bourbon since this happened, but in beer and I'm old. But I think sensitization, isn't that the one where there's like a color component to the pass fail criteria? You have to look at the color of the serum in the vial or something like that.
I mean, you're supposed to always look at the change in the coloration.
But
I'm not sure how that impacts sensitization. Yeah.
Well, in this case, when they did the extraction, the color of the vial looked like the color of the antibiotics. So it was like, instead of being, it's supposed to be like clear, colorless, or slight tint. Right. Well, ours were coming like clear, but bright orange, rust color, and so that was a failed test. But so then it was like, now that created a different challenge. It's like, now we had to explain why this test was not valid for this particular product. Right. But it's a challenge. All right, so
I just want to add a point. I've been telling to any manufacturers that do any of the extract testing, ask the test lab to make sure they take images of it. Because oftentimes it'll come back and they'll say it's tan or it's orange or it's, has particulate. And oftentimes having the image of what that actually means is very valuable for if and when FDA asks questions about it. So just because we do get questions like that from FDA.
Yeah.
I think your point earlier about, right before you were talking about the sensitization test, I was thinking about, as a reviewer, you feel a huge burden of wanting to make sure that nothing bad happens on your watch, right? Like, I think there is a huge, you live by the mission, right, to protect and promote. And I felt so strongly that I didn't want anything on my tenure while I was reviewing something to go off and injure someone and cause damage. No one wants that to happen, right? And so, you ask questions, and you ask a lot of questions, or, if there are things that you don't think quite meet your standards or meet the standards that FDA sets, and that meet, the substantial equivalence if you're doing a 510K. I think there's got to, I will say, of all the 510Ks that we've submitted, de novos we submitted, I've only ever had one that had 0 questions back, right?
It is a rare,
right? Because as you said, what are industry wants to know, well, what's FDA going to ask? How do we manage? And I want to submit a perfect file, Allison. Like, how do I do it? I don't want them to ask any questions. And I'm like, that's just an impossibility. I've only had it again once, and it was a pretty straightforward file, and I couldn't believe it. It just got cleared. We didn't even know who the lead reviewer was. And
I tell people all the time too. Sorry to cut you off, but what I tell people, if I could predict what questions the FDA were going to ask, don't you think we would put that in the submission? And if I could predict such things, you would never know me, because I would already have an island somewhere, because I would have already made $1 bazillion selling my trade secrets to people. But,
exactly. Bye. I'm gonna go buy
it. Yeah, there's gonna be questions. I mean, I think it's just good preparation, mental preparation for those who are submitting. You will have questions, and there will be things that you haven't thought of. Just know that. Some of them will be simple, and maybe just clarifications. Others might not be. So you just got to prepare for that.
Right? There's strategy to what you submit, and I feel like all my friends that were FDA reviewers that are now in industry, the unanimous thing that they all say is like, I wish I had known what was actually important. Because, there are some
Oh,
questions
wow.
you're like, oh my gosh, would I have cared about that one detail? Probably not anymore. This was the big burning question. And this was, this
Right.
really shouldn't have held the file back from getting clearance. I might have asked a question about it, but really, what were the major deficiencies? And we all joke about, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if you could say, listen, FDA, I'm sending this file in, and here are the two sections I really think you should focus on, and where I anticipate you're going to have the biggest questions. But of course, I have clients
I
that
don't want to lead the witness, right?
exactly.
Well, but I think it's like the whole process, and I know it's gotten better in recent years, but I mean, back when I started, it was definitely a throw it over the wall and cross your fingers type of process, where you didn't have any dialogue or collaboration or interaction with the agency. You did what you thought, and largely was informed by the success or failure from the last time that you did this. Um, and then you sent it in and you waited and you didn't have any confirmation. I think the mail center probably sent a note that said, yep, got it, but didn't really have any confirmation or definitely no interaction until day 60, sometimes day 90. You get a list of questions and you're like, oh my gosh. But then you did it all. There was no communication. It was just static things back and forth, and it's still kind of like that. It seems to me that, whoa, can we just take a page out of the pre-sub book when it comes time for the 510K? At least get everybody in the room after they, all the reviewers and the consults have had a chance to review their thing. Bring any and all questions and let's talk through them and let's figure out together as submitter and reviewer. Maybe we can figure out, what's the big deal and what's not the big deal. That way we can both be on the same page. It just seems like there's an opportunity there, but that may not be that
I
pragmatic.
agree. I think the most successful files we've had in the past, 2 years, or since, especially since COVID, because everyone's working remotely, is that anytime when we can get the reviewer on the phone, like there are times when it's just like, oh my gosh, the emails back and forth, and especially FDA said,
Yes.
put it in a precept. It's like, oh, if you'll just get on the phone with us, honestly, it'll take 5-10 minutes and we can get so much accomplished. And I think a lot of
Yes.
reviewers are very hesitant to do that. They think they're going to be put on the spot. They think that the CEO is going to get on and yell at FDA, and that's really not the case. It's like, help us understand what you need, because
Yeah.
I think one of the misconceptions at FDA, and I felt it, is gosh, industry is they're going to try and pull one over on us, or they're all shady. Which I didn't feel that way, but if you're like, oh gosh, I'm here to protect and promote public health, and that's my job. But I think what you forget is that's also industry's job. I don't have any clients, and I can say this
Yeah, I know.
100%. I have no clients that feel like this is just a big business enterprise. I don't care about patients. I'm doing this for money. That's never, like, I guess I don't bring those clients onto my
Yeah.
in my portfolio, but I'm like, everyone cares so much
those
about what
people
they're doing.
exist.
Yes, there's some
Yeah,
out there.
those people exist, but I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day about they were new to the industry, and they had mentioned some negative thing that they heard. I'm like, well, okay, yeah, I'm not naive. Certainly these things happen, but I surround myself, or throughout my career, I've been very blessed that the people that I interact with, the medical device professionals that I interact with, they care about improving the quality of life.
Yes.
And they put that at the top. That's like their North Star. That's the main thing that guides them in their day to day. And I think there's always bad apples, but I think generally speaking, that's who we're dealing with in this industry. People that actually care.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's what's so heartbreaking sometimes is when it comes to benefit risk of a device, or it comes
Yeah.
down to the last push to get something cleared or granted or approved, is, gosh, are we going to deny something, or deny this technology getting out there that is bound to help a lot of people because of one small thing? And it might, again, it's we have to make sure we answer all the questions, right? We have to
Sure.
make sure that we've made every consult and the lead reviewer happy on the file. It's just, weighing those different things. And FDA has done, again, we get back to the guidance documents. FDA has done a fantastic job providing guidance on benefit risk and how to use it in
Yes, they have.
regulatory decisions, right? And I think I had
Mhm.
a reviewer recently who said, "Oh gosh, could you put some of that additional information into your response? That'd actually be really helpful." And I was, I don't know if she had read that guidance or even knew it existed. So I
Yeah.
was like,
Well,
happy to do it. Like that's the stuff that if that makes her sleep easier at night and feel comfortable making the final positive
yeah.
decision, absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess I'll say this for, both industry as well as agency. If you're listening, we try to, on the Global Medical Device podcast, we try to cover quite a bit of things regulatory related, submission related. Allison mentioned the Mr. Or Mr. Pudwell. I guess he is Mr. Pudwell. David Pudwell, Mr. Regulatory. He has a YouTube channel that he goes through some guidances and different aspects of regulatory. You guys are at Acknowledge. You're pretty prolific on the writing side of things, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we love. So we'll have like medical device Mondays, which we love, and that talks about cool new devices that FDA has recently cleared or
yeah,
approved. And we just kind of geek out. I mean,
yeah,
it's just stuff that we've seen come off the FDA press, news press and that.
yeah.
But the other one, we'll have another one coming up shortly too. FDA Friday. It's been fun to interview former FDA reviewers and just see, ask them questions like this. Ask them questions about, what was your experience like at FDA? What were some of the, what was the good? What was the bad? And I love that. And actually, a lot of FDA reviewers read it. I
Yeah.
had some when I was at an FDA pre-sub meeting a year and a half ago now. Someone said, "Oh, you're the lady, the blog lady." I was like, "Oh, am I?" Yeah, that's
The
oh
blog
yeah,
lady.
I read
That's
the
what I'm going to
blog.
call you.
Yeah,
That's what I'm going to call you from now on. The blog
the
lady.
blog lady. So it's nice. I feel like that's you know I am so impressed with what Greenlight Guru is has been
Oh,
able to accomplish and the
thank
amount of
you.
content that you are able to put out because it impacts. Uh, it helps industry because we all, people can better understand, what's the difference between intended use and indications for use. What's going on in cybersecurity and software, and I know
Right.
that FDA consumes that content as well because it's
Yeah.
good for them to know industry's perspective on what they're doing in house. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and thank you. And that's to me, that's the most important thing that we do at Greenlight Guru. Yeah, we have an awesome software platform, but we get to collaborate with people like Allison Komiyama and many other experts in this industry. And we are fortunate that we have a large subscriber network. Folks that are consuming, but I've been through it. I know how frustrating it is to read a guidance or a regulation and be like, okay, I know what all of those words that I just read mean, but when you put them in the combination and the way that they were put, I have no idea what that means. So sometimes it's helpful to have somebody that can say, oh, okay, well, here's what that means, and here's why that means that way, and here's some supporting evidence to corroborate that. So, I think that's a really important objective that we try to do at Greenlight Guru. So I appreciate the comment. Wrapping things up today, any last minute thoughts, tips, pointers, advice, anything that fits into that bucket?
no, I think just on to the last point, I think the most successful reviewers, in my perspective, like the ones that I see nailing it and getting their files off the table and getting things done quicker, the ones that are willing to pick up the phone, are the
Yeah,
ones that are
for
willing to
sure.
be collaborative. I had a conversation recently with someone from the breakthrough designation or the breakthrough program, and their comment to me was, the most effective use of the program is when it is collaborative. When the review
Yeah,
team and the industry team can see eye to eye, see the value of the program, and work collaboratively to move
Sure.
things forward. Otherwise, you have designation, but it doesn't benefit you. And, the reviewers just see, oh gosh, this, it's just more resources and I'm too busy to, to actually review and do sprint discussions. So but I see that across the board. Anytime that it can be an open dialogue, that it can be, hey, help us understand what it is you actually need. And, not to recommend a pre-sub for every single interaction. Those are the ones that really get done quickly. And, it goes back to those shared goals, right? It actually reduces the amount of time that a file actually takes to review. So
Yeah.
I'm optimistic. I feel, there's a lot of new reviewers at FDA. They think scientifically, and I'm just excited that maybe we'll be able to go back in a year or so to go have some meetings and some in-person.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
I mean, I know FDA reaches out to industry from time to time for folks to come in and provide training and things of that nature. They had a program there a couple years ago. I can't remember the name of it, but hopefully that comes back, because I think those were great opportunities for industry to share with the agency. But Allison, thank you. We should do this more often. I know we say this every time we do this, but this time we're going to make sure that we do this more often. I know you have lots of insights, nuggets, and all sorts of wisdom that you can share. And, you've been, although it was only for a short period of time, you've been on both sides of the fence. So
Yeah.
that knowledge is invaluable. Plus, even though, you may have only been there a short time, you're connected with this whole network of folks who also used to be with the agency. You have conversations with them on the regular, and I know that you're extracting additional nuggets of wisdom and all sorts of knowledge from them as well. So thank you. And folks, check out Acknowledge Regulatory Strategies, acknowledge-rs.com. Attend their upcoming event, or at least I think you can do it virtually, even if you can't do it in person, right? If I remember the Reg AF event.
Yeah, if you're not going to be vaccinated, there is the option to attend.
So,
yeah.
All right, so we'll get you all that information so you can check it out. As always, thank you for being listeners and watchers of the Global Medical Device Podcast. Again, hit that subscribe, click the bell, thumbs up, whatever is applicable and appropriate in this case. Do all of that so that way you get up-to-date information about when new episodes are live. And as always, this is your host and founder at Greenlight Guru, Jon Speer, and you have been listening to the Global Medical Device Podcast.